Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. I am thrilled today because I have a live human being with me in the studio, which is my favorite way to record. It's great. It's great. So this week, I'm so excited to welcome Stephanie Butler to the show. She is a coach, a speaker, and an author. And momentarily, we are going to dive into our conversation. Last week, I'd mentioned that I was creeping up on 1,000 listens. We're getting that much closer. So for the community and the listeners of the show, I'm so deeply grateful for you showing up, being here, creating space for women's stories, because women's stories are so important. And if you can share it, I would love to be able to get to 1,000 listens in the next couple of weeks and be able to celebrate that together as a community. So subscribe, share. The more people are talking and listening about the stories of women's transformation, the more we share that collective knowing that it's time. So with that, Stephanie, I'm so glad that you could be here this week, and tell me your story. What brought you to the work that you are doing now?
Yes, my story. I was always feeling a little less than and that I never fit in and I never got the joke.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found drugs and alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and they really worked for me.
Yeah.
So when I imbibed either one or both at the same time, I got the joke. I felt comfortable in my own skin. And, I even could be a little outgoing and really enjoy life. But when I wasn't imbibing, drinking, or using drugs, I was riddled with anxiety, riddled in depression, and just feeling less than like everybody, or I was better than everyone. Like there was no gray in my world. It was like I had to be number one, or I was just the bottom of the barrel. And so I had many years of fun with friends and the club scene in Toronto. Loved it. Like I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I'm alive today sometimes. Absolutely. It got a little crazy. I'm not going to pretend that it didn't. And then I got to a point where it stopped working for me. And what happened was it kind of did a 180. So my anxiety went through the roof, my depression went through the roof. I don't know how I was still sort of working at this time. And the last 4 years of my drinking and using, I have experienced hell on earth.
Mm-hmm.
I know what it is to be a slave to needing to ingest something in my body to alter the way that I'm feeling, because I just didn't know any other way, any other answer. And so this brought me to my knees.
Mm-hmm.
This brought me to a emotional, mental, physical, spiritual bottom. When I reached out for help, and I'm in the helping field, I'm a registered social service worker, been in that field for over 25 years. It was a little bit humbling to ask a coworker for help.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, I knew all the answers, but I was just so in denial and just so overwhelmed with my situation that I was like, what do I do next? Where do I go?
Mm-hmm.
And so through many different avenues, my family doctor, who knew me since I was about 12 years old, figured out and knew that I was dealing with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so he basically got me into a day program. And that was the beginning of my recovery journey. I say recovery journey because I've chosen abstinence.
Mm-hmm.
It's been over 20 years now that I've chosen to be abstinent from any mood altering drug or alcohol. And I've remained that way for over 20 years now. And I am so grateful and honored to say that my life has done a 180 again.
Mm-hmm.
And why I can say today that me figuring out that I had an addiction issue was probably one of the greatest things that could ever happen to me, was because it changed the whole trajectory of my life. It changed how I conduct myself in my day-to-day living, how I am as a person, how I treat others, is completely different than when I was out there drinking and using. I was not a kind person. I was angry, uh, very judgmental, and just tired.
Mm-hmm.
Tired, just going through the motions.
Yeah.
I was just surviving.
Yeah. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable about that story, because I feel like not a lot of women not a lot of women in general, but women who are professionals come forward and are really open and transparent about what addiction feels like, how it plays out in their lives. And I think that it's a story that's probably a lot more common than we realize.
Yeah.
Because we live in a world that, one, encourages addiction in many ways.
Absolutely.
And it encourages us to not feel. So it feels like a perfect storm of course, addiction takes hold because the seeds of that are planted long before our first taste of alcohol in many ways, or interaction with drugs. I'm interested to know, what do you think the biggest misconception about addiction is?
I think we cross a invisible line where we never know we've crossed it into addiction, and we think that we're at a point where we can just stop.
Right.
And then most people get to a point where they're like, I can't live like this anymore, and realize it's the drugs and the alcohol that is killing me. But that's the only way I knew how to cope. I mean, I tried other things, absolutely, but nothing worked as well and as quickly as substances. And so I think what happens is we think it's an option, we think it's a choice. And a lot of other people think it's willpower and it's a choice. And then we realize I can't not do this. And I can't stop on my own. Like, kudos to you if your story is different and you have stopped on your own. I could not. It was just could not function. I did not know what the next steps would have been. Yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly, when you and I first connected, I was reading Matthew Perry's book. Have you read that?
No.
So it helped me understand what happens to brains that are where addiction takes hold. So in some of the first chapters, he talks about his first experience and how when he had his first drink, when you were talking about you got the joke, it made me think about that, because he's like, when I had my first drink, all of a sudden I was like, oh, the sky is blue. Oh, the sky's blue. Oh, that's why that's funny. It was a very similar reaction in what I was reading in his words. And I think that is something that we don't talk about enough as a society, right? That every brain is different. And some brains, when those chemicals enter, it is like unlocking a door.
Absolutely. I always give the analogy. One of my clients, again, I've worked in mental health for over 25 years and addiction. And one of my clients has bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he ingests cocaine,
Right.
he can sit down and watch a movie or read a book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Without the cocaine, he can't think straight. He can't sit for 2 hours, an hour and a half to watch a movie and actually know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That chemical works in his brain. He's addicted to it because he's used it so many times because it helps him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's what I tell folks is like, if you don't have that addiction, if you use, say, cocaine, you're going to feel like you're on speed
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be zooming around and, you know, and then it will dissipate and, you know, you'll be like, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'll try that again,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but somebody who it works for,
Mm-hmm.
it, it's, it's not to get high.
No.
It's to regulate and to function on some level. And that's when I talk about crossing that invisible line. We don't know when we do that. And then it becomes the only life that we know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is something that's really important because when you were talking earlier about, you know, some people just think it's a matter of willpower. It's not that at all. Like it's,
No.
it's, you know, this chemical is actually performing chemistry in your brain that is making it better, easier for your life to function.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is when you cross that line of constantly needing more and more and more and more. I think I'm not going to get the numbers right because it's been a little while, but he was having to take 48 Vicodin a day.
Yeah.
48.
Wow.
And one less, and he would start to feel withdrawal symptoms, which are painful,
Yeah.
like physically painful, and you can't function either. So that's the issue with that brain chemistry is that it's going to constantly need more to feed it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you cross another line where it stops working. You know, I couldn't get drunk anymore and I didn't know how to be sober. And it was like, you know,
Right.
like, so you're just drinking and no effects are happening. And so you don't know what to do. And that's when most people reach out for help. That's when most people realize this is not working for me, you know? And I think, you know, denial is a huge part of this disease, this illness, where the only life that I knew was drinking and drugging for so many years. I can't imagine my life without it, but I can't imagine living this life anymore.
Right.
And until you get to that point, you're going to keep going and doing what you know, even though it's destroying you and killing you and you're living in hell and it's horrible. That's what you know how to do to survive. And because I was in the field, I think I knew that window, door, whatever you want to call it, opened. And I was like, that's going to slam shut real soon. I'm going to forget that I need help. I'm going to go back into denial.
Right.
I need to scream out loud right now and tell as many people as I can, like, I need help. I need help. I need help. You know? And I still was willing to get the help and do whatever was asked of me because I knew the gig was up, that I had no more plans. I could not continue the way that I was living because it was absolutely against every moral fiber of my being of who I was becoming.
Right.
The lines that I was crossing in the sand were getting, you know, it was like, well, and then I'd cross that line. Well, I haven't, well, yet. Always add yet to the story. And, you know, I think it was probably about 9 months I had not looked in the mirror.
Wow.
And then it was probably another 6 to 8 months after I got some help that I could finally look in the mirror. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you see when you looked in the mirror that first time?
I just saw a real sick person who was getting help finally.
Mm-hmm.
Before then, I thought I was deviant. I thought I was just a really evil kind of person.
Mm.
And the shame and guilt of just who I'd become. And again, I was in denial and believed that I was choosing all of this.
Right.
I mean, I was on some level, I take full responsibility for my actions, but I was not sane. I was not thinking clearly most of the time. I was, intoxicated on some level. And so my reality was not most people's reality of how I was seeing. It was very distorted. And, you become only almost sociopathic in the sense of I had isolated myself completely from everybody and anybody. I used to be like, let's go to the club, let's party, let's have a good time. I had tons of friends, and here I was wearing my pajamas, walking down the street to get a pack of cigarettes and my booze, and getting back to my place and locking myself up.
Right.
And just completely isolated. And all I could think about was, how was I going to keep myself intoxicated all day long? And I didn't care what I had to do to get it. And that is scary, scary stuff.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where I feel like I had 3 options. And those 3 options were get help, kill myself, or keep going to the bitter end, which I never did heroin, and I never injected needles, but that's was my plan.
Right.
I don't like needles. To this day, I'm still terrified of needles. I think that was a saving grace, but I knew that I would have to probably work for some folks who were not good people, and that they could inject that for me.
Right.
So that I could then be so in oblivion that I wouldn't be thinking about what I'd have to do to keep getting oblivion. So those are my 3 options.
Yeah. That's something I'd never considered. I have not been through an addiction cycle, and so that thought of I need to be so not in my body that I can continue doing this is really it's really powerful. Into how difficult it would be to take that first step out. And the shame that as a culture we build around people who have addiction, it almost like creates a barrier.
Absolutely. I mean, even when I was getting help, I thought I should just kill myself because I'm such a burden. I felt they'll get over it. I'm just a pain in the ass anyhow. If people would be better off without me. And that's where I was. That's where I was at. And, I share this story because for me, I see that spirit, God, source was working in my life even when I wasn't connected. I had 2 cats at the time. I was living in my parents' basement. They took me back. I knew I needed to get out of Dodge. And my 2 cats came up to me. Like, I was literally sitting on the couch and thinking and I made the plan of how I was going to kill myself. This was me waiting to get into treatment.
Right.
I'm still taking some pills to sleep at night, but I'd stopped using everything else. And I was like, okay, so my dad will find me in the shower. They'll get over it. That's what I got to do. And I felt some relief, like, oh, it's all going to be over.
Yeah.
Like, felt good, and then my cats came up at the exact same time and sat on my lap. And I laugh because it's just insanity. My thought turned to, well, that would be really irresponsible to leave your cats. You can't do that.
Right.
And so I'm alive, so I didn't go through with that plan, but like that's how spirit works in my life. Like knew that I was raised so conscious about hard work ethic, and you take care of your own, and you
Right.
do what you say you're going to do. And this is how it was presented to me.
Right.
And
Because that was a story you could hear. That was a familiar neural pathway that you could access.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I laugh, and I have a tattoo of those two babies on my foot, and I'm like, they saved my life, I saved theirs, and then they in return saved mine. So for me, spirit, God works in very funny, mysterious ways, and 1 second I'm gonna kill myself, the next is how irresponsible. Like, come on. I'm about to kill myself, and I'm thinking maybe my cat is irresponsible.
Yeah.
Not thinking too clearly. But, something was looking out for me. Absolutely.
So was that your first, so you said that you were clean, you were mostly clean at that point, but was that the first real step toward healing?
I think so. For me to admit I needed help, to my doctor, to another professional, and to agree to going to get that help, I did feel the shame and guilt, but I felt like I was going to be okay if I just followed the instructions, if I just did what people were telling me.
Okay.
Because everything I had done up to that point was
not working,
not good. I had no more plans.
Yeah.
And I thank God for that. Because I, would always come up with some makeshift plan of how I would get more money, how I would just, they'll lay off if I just, and next thing you know, I'm in my next jackpot.
Right.
And I'm living in hell chasing the next, use. So that was the beginning. And I did it was an 8-week program. They let me do it twice.
Okay.
Because I was so unwell. I was so befogged. I could not retain anything because of the withdrawal, and just, it was so surreal. Just so surreal. You're sitting in therapy or sitting in group in treatment, and you're like, how did I get here?
Right.
Like nobody expects to be there ever. And so for me, that built the foundation that I needed. And for me, I realized that I was searching my entire life out there, outside of me, for the answer. And all I do is become addicted to that thing outside of me, whether it's shopping, food, drugs, money, sex, whatever it is, to make me feel different than the way I'm feeling. I will never get enough of it, because it's only instant gratification, and then I'm back feeling the way that I felt.
Right.
So for me, it was an inside job. And so the last 20 plus years, and looking back now, it's always hindsight. I was always searching for a spiritual belief, a faith, whatever you want to call it. But I was so resistant to it that I never fully appreciated it. And I mean, I was raised atheist, like not too many people are, but I was. And so I was taught, if you want anything done right, kid, do it yourself. Don't depend on anyone. And so that was my motto. Great motto, eh? And so these last 20 years, my spirituality came first.
Right.
And so for me, it's source, it's God, it's creator, whatever language you want to use, is what keeps me here and keeps me feeling whole. Because before, I had a hole in my soul.
Yes. And
nothing will fill that. It might fill it for 30 seconds, might fill it for a day, half a day, depending on what that thing is, but outside material things will always lead me to wanting more of whatever that is. And with spirituality, I have this knowing, this feeling, this deep connection with spirit. I know I'm going to be okay no matter what. I feel that I can trust myself to lead me to source, to help me have the strength and courage to get through whatever is in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel whole.
Mm-hmm.
I feel connected. Before, it's put that we separate ourselves from the whole, and therefore that's all I could think about was like, I'm different, nobody understands me, I don't get the joke, what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I could see and focus on. And so when I imbibed drugs and alcohol, it worked for me, and it was like, aha, I feel like me. Now I don't need those things. I know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I am a child of spirit. I am here having a human experience because I'm a keener.
Mm-hmm.
Chose this. and I'm here to help others on their journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to, raise the collective unconsciousness.
Right.
I'm here to add love, self-compassion, kindness into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm a reflection of spirit.
Right.
I align my soul with spirit energy. And this is why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know any of that.
Yeah. Well, so as we've been speaking, the word surrender keeps rolling around in my head. It's that, and when you talked about the two sort of foundations that you were brought up on of atheism, and which led to, you have to do this on your own. Those are foundations of most of the systems in our world.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so most people can relate to that because we are taught that believing is a weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such interesting. There's such interesting dichotomy because there's so many deeply religious norms that are woven into our society, but we are taught to not trust.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what is such a mind fuck in so many ways, because like our whole society is built on a religious foundation.
Yeah.
But religion and spirituality are not the same thing.
No.
And I think that's where so many people find themselves searching, wondering, and questioning, because they're in a place of, but this is the myth that my whole identity was built on, but it doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I find that in organized religions, it's still part of our larger society where it's telling you you're not good enough. You're not doing this right, or you're not doing that right. So again, I have a hole in my soul. I'm not good enough. I'm not fitting in. I'm not being, good, like just well.
And something else that you just said triggered in me. It also it's that external control, right? Like, so many foundations of traditional religion of you either go to heaven or hell, right? The final judgment. That is a huge mechanism of control that takes everything outside of you.
Yeah.
Right. And that is not everyone's experience. I know that.
No.
And that is not, I grew up in an Anglican tradition. I worked at an Anglican church camp my whole life. My kids still do now. And it was, interestingly, that camp that taught me actual spirituality and looking internally. And that it is not, we should not be looking outside of ourselves. Yeah, that the message is love. And it's really important to see that, to know that you will be searching forever if you are looking for something outside of yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just have, I guess people call that faith. I call it grace, that I know no matter what, I'm okay right here, right now.
Yeah.
And in any second that you ask and connect with yourself and with spirit and ask, do I need anything? The answer is no. You need absolutely nothing, because you're whole and perfect and enough the way you are. And I think the human experience teaches us to forget that all the time, that you're okay, you're perfectly whole. And, like, because everywhere we're being told your teeth aren't white enough, you're not tall enough, you're not thin enough, you're not short enough, you're not chubby enough, you're not, so that we'll buy stuff, right? So when you hear that all day, every day, and every part of society tells us that on whatever level it is that they're trying to get you to believe in, how can you not think that on some level? And a lot of folks I know who have kind of been through addiction and are living in recovery, we say that spirituality is for those who have lived hell on earth. We don't need religion because I've already been to hell.
Right. Yeah.
And now on the flip side, I've been to heaven. I know what heaven on earth is. And so I see miracles. I see, my intuition leads me to where I need to be going. The answers are out there if you're open to seeing them. And I'm always guided. And so to me, that is heaven on earth, because I know, like, I'm at peace. I know what serenity is, where I never had that in my life before, ever, unless, I was high as a kite.
Right. Yeah.
Unless it was chemically induced.
Yes.
I don't need that anymore. And so when you are connected to spirit, you're whole. And I don't need to look outside myself for the Mercedes or the Honda, whatever floats your boat, whatever car, it's not going to fix me.
Right. Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah. That's not where your worth ever comes from.
No.
So I'm thinking about, there's a wound, right? There is a wound that drugs and alcohol was covering for you. So just thinking from the perspective of somebody who might be listening, who maybe is in a place of having a wound, and it could be a whole host of things, right? You talked about, it could be shopping, it could be scrolling on our phones for so many of us. And I will include myself in that because I go down that rabbit hole as well, right? We do the scrolling addiction because it's outward, right? So it takes, it's the strange, again, intersection of, it takes a huge amount of energy, because when I'm scrolling and looking at those things, I'm observing someone else's life and having thoughts about it, when I could be using that energy inward, but it feels like more work to do that inward work than to look outward. So what is the bridge that can happen for people to start letting the wound come forward so that healing can happen?
Yeah, I think, we can't change anything that we don't acknowledge. And as scary as it is to admit and surrender to the fact that you're not doing well, and, oh crap, I have an addiction. Nobody wants to say that out loud. It's going to be the most freeing spot that you could be in. It's going to be terrifying. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it and tell you it's going to be amazing. It's going to be scary as heck. But once we admit the problem, once we can say it out loud, and even if you're just saying it out loud to you and to the universe, that's the first step. And we need to trust your gut. Trust that you already know what you need to do or who you need to talk to.
Yes.
And for me, it was like I was calling the professionals. I'm in, the business of helping people. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to call so-and-so. I'm going to talk to my coworker, and I just called everybody and anybody. And I received the support, the help that I needed, and I trusted it.
Right.
And I needed to do the complete opposite of what I had been doing my entire life.
Right.
And that's scary stuff because it's the unknown, it's uncomfortable, and it's like, what's on the other side of all this? Who am I? What am I doing? But we can't do any of this on our own. You need to get support, whether that's treatment, there's 12-step meetings. There are counselors. You could do one-on-one if you don't want to go into a group setting. There are, there's just so many ways out there to get support. And, for me, the answer is spiritual. For me, if you had any connection in your life or any belief, start connecting with that belief. Like, is it the universe? Is it creator? Is it God? Is it whatever label you use? Start asking for help there. And just see, where that leads you. But it's asking for help. And I think that's one of the top 3 things, which is the hardest thing for a human being to do.
Yeah. And the word surrender is coming up for me again, because it is that surrender to you let go of control, right? Where so much of addiction is your work to control absolutely everything that's happening in your space. And we abandon our physical bodies because it's too painful to be in there. And control is the only sense that we have. And so surrendering that control and saying, I'm going to give this over to you for a little while, right? We talk about that internal locus of control and listening to that internal voice. And sometimes until that voice, there's healing starting to happen, we do need to ask for help and say, please show me the way. Yeah. I can't do this right now. Please help me to get to do this thing.
And I, I'll challenge that, I thought I had control. I was not controlling anything. Alcohol and drugs had a complete control on me. And I was a slave to it. That's the hell that you're living in right now, whether you're a slave to gambling, gaming, sugar, coffee, shopping, whatever it is. It can be put aside. And for me, I needed to replace it with a connection with source. I needed to go to that place because it's an inside job. Because I can put down the alcohol, I can put down the drugs, but then I can pick up
something else,
everything else. Absolutely. And that's not what we want.
No.
They might be a little less, it's harm reduction approach of less, impeding on my physical body, but, still don't want to go down that road. And just know that there's a lot of folks out there who have surrendered, have asked for the help. And, I'm not living in that hell anymore. I'm not there. And I'm not claiming that everything's peachy clean and super awesome right now. It's not all rainbows and lollipops. Right. I tell you, life still happens.
Yeah,
absolutely. But I don't need to get messed up over any of it. And I've learned, like, that saying, and I say this all the time, it takes a village, from birth to death. not just a child. We need it. Like, I've never, and I've said this over and over, I've never been a 48-year-old woman on Wednesday, April the 19th. I've never done it before. I might need to ask for a little bit of help today.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no manual, there's no script, there's no, hey, this is what you do. We're all figuring this out as we go along. And it takes a village. And that's okay to need the village.
We're actually wired to need the village.
Absolutely.
Right. And it is this culture of isolation that is contributing to the pain of separation.
Yeah.
Separation from source, separation from the earth, separation from each other, which is, COVID, like, it took all of that and put it very plainly in front of us.
Yeah.
Right. And then people started building habits that fostered separation. And so I think that this is a really important conversation to be having at this point in time, because coming back into community and finding our way back to each other is some of the key work that is necessary at this point in history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I work in the field, and everybody is just talking about how their anxiety levels are through the roof, and they never had anxiety before. And it's just, I can catch myself where my full-time gig at work, my corporate job, I used to have to wear a mask. We don't anymore. And I go to work and I'm like, oh, I feel like I've committed something against the law because I'm not wearing my mask, or I'm not 6 feet away from people. And so we've gotten this 2.5 years of conditioning happening. And now we have to go back to, no, we like people.
Yeah.
We want to be around people.
Yes.
I know it felt safe and secure in your little tiny bubble, but that is not any way for anyone to live.
No.
Yeah. So unhealthy.
Yeah. And we're seeing the repercussions of this. I mean, we talked about it. It's my second podcast record today, and there's some beautiful intersection. So I'm also thinking about the conversation I had earlier. But the learning, that pain, that deep pain of separation, where it feels like safety, but it's really not. And now I believe we are only beginning to see the repercussions of all of that isolation. Oh. So I remember, I think back to the early days. Oh, we were so naive in the early days of the pandemic. And I thought there would be a day where all of a sudden, like, all the restrictions would be lifted all at the same time, and there would be this sense of celebration, and we would be so grateful to be back with the people that we loved again. And that's not what happened. It's not even close to what happened, because of the ever shifting nature and gradual shifts and changes. It just shifted who we were, rather than giving us an opportunity to really consider, but who do we want to be? And how do we want to show up in the world after this? Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely. I was really hopeful at the beginning that we would come out of it better. And that hasn't happened yet.
No, I think it's shifted and raised a few folks on the right path of getting some support and getting help, and realizing, okay, all those coping skills that I had, which I couldn't use because of COVID, really weren't that healthy. Really weren't great coping mechanisms. So what can I do going forward to help me not feeling great about where I'm at in life, or feel okay in my own skin? And, I think we're getting to a place where we can talk about mental health and addiction a little bit more. I think there's still huge ignorance out there because of how it's portrayed on social media and television and all those things. We're still like the the humor,
Mhm.
the, like, oh, Betty's
Right.
drinking again. Oh, and
Yeah.
it's funny. No, it's tragic. It's
Mhm.
absolutely tragic. And that's, I think, more of those conversations are happening,
Mhm.
and people are feeling safe to talk about it a little bit more. And it's generational, because if you use the word anxiety, people are like, I don't have anxiety. And you're like,
Mm.
you point out all these things. Well, I just worry a little bit.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well,
Okay.
you have worry issues.
Yes.
Let's call it
Let's
that.
call it that. Yeah.
And let's look at some coping so that you don't
Mhm.
have to worry so much.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of folks who, we were raised, just pull up your bootstraps,
Right.
suck it up, buttercup, and get on with it.
Mhm. Yeah.
You got stuff to do.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's like,
Keep calm and
just not
carry on.
It's just
Right.
not working. It's not working for me.
I think the area that I do have hope in, however, and I hope that it sort of is percolated in this conversation as well, is that it feels really turbulent right now, because that is what happens at the beginning of a healing journey. And I feel collectively we are at the beginning of a healing journey.
Yeah.
And that's the scariest time. It's the most turbulent time. And it brings all of the things that were hiding in the shadows up to the surface. Yeah. And I think collectively that's what we're seeing right now, is all of the things that were latent in the shadows, or not even just latent, we were intentionally covering,
Yep.
so that we didn't actually have to do the healing around it. It's now all coming to the surface, which is deeply painful and hard in this moment. And I believe that it's necessary to move forward in a more deeply connected way.
Absolutely. And I think, that, collective unconscious that I spoke about is, there's going to be some empathy. People who might have been a little bit more judgmental with mental health now see themselves on that spectrum and going, oh, oh, now I maybe understand what,
Yeah.
Sally was dealing with
Mm-hmm.
all these years. And I just hope that these types of conversations continue to happen. I hope that we talk about allyship, that we can become allies. And so when we're hearing those kinds of conversations where it's like, well, Eddie was just hammered, it was hilarious. And it's like, most people don't get hammered when they're that age.
Right.
And at the family barbecue. I hope Eddie's okay.
Yes.
And making space for those kinds of conversations. Not comfortable, not what people want to talk about, but I think more of us are talking about it.
And is this some of the work that you're doing in your coaching work?
Yes. I mean, I meet people where they're at, and whatever you need space for me to hold a container, a safe container to work through. And I ask questions that maybe you've never posed to yourself, and have folks looking at their situations a little bit of a different way. It's not just addiction. It's, this isn't working for me in my life. I don't know what is next, or, I need more coping skills because of this X, Y, and Z, or, and that's what I'm seeing. Our folks are, seeing that I want something different in my life, because this has not been working for a long time. And now I'm fully seeing how this is really not working for me. And like we spoke about earlier, naming it out loud is how we start to change things. And it takes a lot of courage to ask for that help, and to say, you know what, I'm committed to my growth journey.
Yes.
I am committed to being a better version of myself, because I feel that deep inside, I want to become who I've always meant to be.
Yes.
Not easy stuff.
No.
And like you said, we are collectively at that I'm so uncomfortable stage. But that's when we know we're out of our comfort zone and growth
is possible.
Is happening.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What you said about saying it out loud is so interesting, because I do very similar work with clients. And when they say the thing that they've been holding on to for so long, my next question always is, and how does that feel in your body? Because when we release that thing we've been holding on to so tightly, there is a physical reaction, because it is an energetic release.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that energetic release is something that we have been missing, and is the key. And I heard it in your story many times, right? Where you accepted, asked for help, surrendered to that help, and all of that energetic release starts leading to healing.
Absolutely. And it's when we're in it and saying it out loud, we take away the power of that as well. Because when we're just ruminating about it in our head, we make it thousands of times bigger than it actually is. And when we say it out loud, it's like, oh, that wasn't as scary or as big as I thought it was once it went across my mouth, across my lips. And in CBT, cognitive behavioral theory, they say, if you can name it, you can tame it.
Yes.
And it's so true. Right. And that's why I love, there's so many modalities. There's so many different ways to support folks. And it's a matter of finding what vibes with you, what works for you. And as a coach, I get to try different things on for folks. Home practice, try this, let's try that, let's try this, and see what they're relating to and what makes them see a little shift. And then this is the direction we go in. And we all have the answers within. It's just a matter of clearing away some stuff,
so that you know how to access it.
Some stories that we've been believing for a long time that aren't absolutely true, to then hear that intuition, to hear what is the next right thing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. That was a very fast hour.
It sure was.
Always. Thank you for being here, for sharing your story, for being so courageous and open. I think I say it in almost every episode, women's stories and voices matter. The more we see each other in each other, the more we know that we are not alone. And that's how we start healing that separation. So thank you. And in the show notes, as always, will be all of the links for how to find and work with Stephanie. And as always, how to find and work with me. And big love, everybody.
Thank you.